Today we'll do the Poṭṭhapāda Sutta, the Discourse to Potthapada, Digha Nikaya Sutta 9. And it's a very long sutta, so we'll be studying it over 2 lessons to end the year. And then next year we'll probably have a new series. The Poṭṭhapāda Sutta is one of those very long suttas which are used by the early Buddhists to kind of advertise the teaching to others, to show others what Buddhism has to offer, basically. So they're full of stories, and the teachings are given a very detailed treatment. And normally something will happen. Someone listens, then he understands, and he becomes an arahat, and so on. So we get a lot of that kind of situation. Sometimes there are debates, there are questions asked, and so on. So today's sutta, or if you like, today's story, is of course centers around a wanderer called Poṭṭhapāda. Actually, there are 2 key people in this story. Poṭṭhapāda starts off the first half of the sutta. And in the second half, we meet another interesting character called Citta, the elephant trainer's son. Okay? And he's special in his own way. Now, Poṭṭhapāda was a wanderer, or we can say he's a wanderer. In the story, he's always a wanderer. But something happens to him in this story. Now, a wanderer is a class of people in the Buddha's time who decide to leave home and find out the truth for themselves. They're not really monks, but they're not lay people either. They're kind of something in between, if you like. And they're basically seekers. So they go around debating and asking questions, and very happy to meet teachers. So Poṭṭhapāda is one of those really kind wanderer. He is a very special kind of wanderer who respects the Buddha, who is very eager to learn. So you see this kind of quality in him. And you also see a very beautiful quality in him in the second half of the sutta, where he actually reconciles a monk, or an ex-monk, Citta. And this Citta, he got into some argument with another elder, Mahakotika, and he left the order. He joined the sangha 6 times, and he left. He resigned 6 times. So now in the 7th time, you find Poṭṭhapāda brings him to see the Buddha, and then he gets teachings from the Buddha, and he joins back as a monk, and this time he succeeds in his training, becomes an arahat. So we have a story of 2 people, actually. You have the story of this wanderer. He asked the Buddha lots of interesting questions. He's a really keen learner, and he's a man of great of goodwill, who brings back a monk and reconciles him with the sangha. And so our study today, for some of you, is like an introduction to the nature of the suttas, especially a long sutta. I'm normally quite hesitant to teach a long sutta because it takes time. But this sutta is quite interesting, and when we study a sutta, it's like making a new friend, a very old friend, right? This friend is 2,500 years old. Like any friend we make, we have to keep in touch, right? We don't say, okay, I've known this person and I'm not going to read about him anymore. It's not, it cannot be like that. A sutta is something we learn the whole life. I've been, reading and teaching the sutta for the last 50 years of my Buddhist life. And even today, there is something new which I've discovered, and that is why I keep updating the suttas, and you find there are a lot of notes and cross-references to help you understand the sutta better. And I will show you all this as we go along. So that's a bit of introduction. Who is Poṭṭhapāda? Is a wanderer. He meets the Buddha comes to meet him. And let's see what happens then. Let's go down to the translation itself. Nice. Here we are, further down a bit more. Yeah. Some more, go down. Yeah, okay, here we are. Poṭṭhapāda Sutta, Discourse to Poṭṭhapāda, D9. Thus have I heard, at one time the Blessed One was staying in Anathapindika's park in Jeta's Grove near Savatthi. This is in northern India, where Buddha spent the last 25 years of his life. And most of the suttas were taught there. At that time, the wanderer Poṭṭhapāda was staying in the tinduka-encircled single hall in Mallikā's park for public debates. And there was with him a great following of wanderers, some 300. All right, so we have an idea of a bit of the social background of Buddha's time. So we have this hall, a small hall, one single hall, built by Queen Mallikā. So she built this hall for the wanderers to assemble. Now, if Sutta says there are 300 wanderers, so you can imagine it, the hall is quite big to be able to house 300 wanderers. It's a kind of like just a hall, single hall. And there are trees encircling it. They're called tinduka tree. I'm not sure what kind of trees they are, but if you look up in some, you Google it online or look up some Indian books on trees, you probably know better. So the trees, of course, will give shade when it is warm and so on. There are always trees in the suttas. So the 300 of these wanderers, and here we have an idea, the difference between the wanderers and the Buddhist monks. So now you have another person coming, this is the Buddha. Section 2. Then the Blessed One, having dressed himself in the morning and taking robe and bow, entered Savatthi for alms. Then the Blessed One thought, it's too early to go into Savatthi for alms. What if I were to go to Mallikā's park with a tinduka-encircled single hall for public debates and meet the wanderer Poṭṭhapāda? So here we see this, again, this very friendly atmosphere, this ambience where the religious people often meet each other, talk to each other. So here the Buddha knows Poṭṭhapāda is living there, and it's too early to go into the town to collect alms, probably around 4 a.m., 5 a.m. And we know by that time they're already up. So the Buddha thought, well, why do I drop in this place and meet with this wanderer, Poṭṭhapāda? 2.3. Then the Blessed One went to Mallikā's park with a tinduka-encircled single hall for public debates. Now, at that time, okay, here we get the background of the wanderers. Now, at that time, the wanderer Poṭṭhapāda was sitting with a large crowd of wanderers who were all talking loudly, shouting, making loud noises, and indulging in various low talk. Now, the Pali word here is tirachana katha, animal talk. Literally is animal talk, such as talk about kings, robbers, ministers of state, about armies, and dangers, and wars, about food and drink, about clothing, furniture, garlands, scents, about relatives, about vehicles, about villages, towns, cities, and countryside, about women and heroes, the gossips of the street and at the well. Okay, here at the well, today we would say at the pub, for example. Talks of the dead, talks of diversity, philosophical discussion of the past and future. Talk about the creation of the world and of the sea, and talk whether things exist or not, or about gain and loss, and so on, all kinds of talk. Yeah? So the idea here is that you find these wanderers, having a good time, right? So you find, the India background of India at that time, is something a bit like what it's like today. The country is very advanced for its time, and there was this empire building up. So in other words, the country is unified, more peaceful. People have work to do and they have money, and then division of labor and so on. So some of them, of course, decide to take it easy so that they become religious people, the wanderers, they get supported. And what do wanderers do? They wander around, and when they meet, they discuss all kinds of ideas, and they can be quite noisy. So this is an example here. And Poṭṭhapāda is one of them. So here you begin to see, even amongst this kind of people, that there are those who are really sincere seekers, that they're looking for answers, and Poṭṭhapāda is one of them. All right, so Poṭṭhapāda, he notices the Buddha approaching, okay? Section 4. Then the wanderer Poṭṭhapāda saw the Blessed One approaching from a distance. Having seen him, he called his own company of followers to order, saying, "Good sirs, be quiet, please. Don't make a noise, good sirs. The reckless Gautama is approaching. The Venerable One is fond of quiet, one who speaks in praise of quiet. If he sees that this company is quiet, he will most likely want to come and visit us." So you can understand here that Poṭṭhapāda respects the Buddha, and he knows something about the Buddha. And they feel it's really great if this teacher comes along, they can ask him questions, things like that. So when this was said, the wanderers fell silent. So this gives us an idea that Poṭṭhapāda was a kind of leader of these wanderers too. All right, so now when the Buddha approaches, section 5, then the Blessed One approached the wanderer Poṭṭhapāda. Then the wanderer Poṭṭhapāda said this to the Blessed One. Bhante, all right, so Bhante here means sir, is a common term where someone younger or junior addresses a senior person. So Bhante, sir, if you like. Let the Blessed One come. Bhante, the Blessed One is welcome. It has been a long time, Bhante, since the Blessed One has made this exception, gone out of his way, that is in coming here. Bhante, let the Blessed One take a seat. Here's a seat that has been prepared. Okay, this 5.2 is a formality. You find this repeated in other suttas also. For example, in the Udumbarika Sihanada Sutta, you find the wanderer there also says the same thing when welcoming the Buddha. So there's always a seat prepared there for teacher to come and kind of give them teachings. So 5.3, the Blessed One sat down on the prepared seat, and the wanderer Poṭṭhapāda, taking a low seat, sat down at one side. So now we are prepared for the teaching, so to speak. Yeah? So the Buddha is also very polite, and the Buddha begins by, again, asking a formal question. 5.4, Poṭṭhapāda, what is the talk you are having sitting together here? What is the conversation that is left unfinished, right? So he has interrupted all this talk, and he asks, what is it all about? Now, this is where we find this Poṭṭhapāda very apologetic, section 6. And the Blessed One had said this, the wanderer Poṭṭhapāda said, Bhante, never mind the subject that those assembled here have been discussing just now. It would not be difficult for the Venerable Blessed One to hear about it later, okay? So you can always hear this kind of talk later. But Bhante, on several occasions when various teachers, recluses, and Brahmins had met and were seated in the debating hall, the talk concerning the cessation of consciousness arose thus. How does the cessation of consciousness occur? All right, so here we have this Poṭṭhapāda raising a very interesting question. So, this is what we're discussing now. So this gives us a good idea of the kind of intellectual ferment that the quest that people in the Buddha's time were going on, and they were asking questions. What is consciousness? How does it end? and so on, right? So here Poṭṭhapāda is giving a kind of a preview. Says, there are these people, there are various opinions how consciousness ends, or what is consciousness for that matter. So 6.3, we see Poṭṭhapāda kind of preparing a long question for the Buddha. In this regard, some say a person's consciousness arises or passes away without reason or cause. At the time when it arises within him, he is conscious. At the time it passes away, he is unconscious. Thus, some propose the cessation of consciousness. So he's kind of combining the ending of consciousness with the arising of consciousness. So some people do not know how it really happens. It just happens like that without any reason. So that's the first view. You can see a round number here as usual. This round number means an idea that this speaker is presenting. Another says thus, no, sir, that is not how it is. It should be like this. Sir, the consciousness is the person's self. All right, so this is another well-known view. The mind and the self are the same thing. The consciousness and the self are the same thing. At the time when it comes, he is then conscious. At the time when it goes, he's then unconscious. Thus, some propose the cessation of consciousness. All right. So this question actually is about consciousness. Now, the third view, another says thus, no, sir, that's not how it is. It should be like this. Now, sir, there are recluses and Brahmins of great power, of great influence. They draw consciousness into a person and they draw it out of him. At the time when they draw consciousness into the person, he is then conscious. At the time when they draw it out of him, he is unconscious. Thus, some propose the cessation of consciousness. So some believe there are yogis, or there are masters of the mind who's able to control the consciousness of others, basically. So this is the third view. Now the fourth view is similar to number 3, except in this case, the power is attributed to deities. Another says, does no, sir, this is not how it is. It should be like this. Now, sir, there are deities of great power, of great influence. They draw consciousness into a person and they draw it out of him. So, in other words, this consciousness is controlled by these deities, or these devas, if you like. So, he's not very sure, right? So, how then, Bhante, does the cessation of consciousness occur? Right, so you see here, who's asking this question? You got this group of wanderers, right? And Poṭṭhapāda is the one asking this question. He says, this is what we're discussing now. All right, now the Buddha replies, section 7. Poṭṭhapāda, in this matter, those recluses and Brahmins who say a person's consciousness arises or passes away without reason or cause, they are wrong from the start. Why is that? Poṭṭhapāda, it is with causes, with conditions, that a person's consciousness arises or passes away. Some consciousness arises through training. Some consciousness passes away through training. All right, so this is the departure, the key idea which the Buddha is presenting. He says, it is possible to train your consciousness, train your mind in this case. And of course, in this, once the Buddha says that, Poṭṭhapāda is very curious. He asks immediately, and what is that training? Okay, and so in this case, the Buddha himself says, and what is that training? Poṭṭhapāda is very curious, of course. And the Buddha immediately says, what is that training? Okay, so then the teaching begins. All right, so now 7.4, we have what is called the Buddha arising in the world. In other words, the teaching is available, right? So this is a very beautiful passage. It shows the teaching is present. Make use of it. Here, Poṭṭhapāda arises in the world that the Tathagata does come, the square brackets, translates the previous word. Arahat, fully self-awakened, accomplished in wisdom and conduct, welfare, knower of the worlds, fearless, guide of persons to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, awakened, blessed. Okay, now this is a formality in the sutta. I don't think the Buddha would like introduce himself literally by announcing this long title, like a business card. This is what the sutta reciters present to us, so that we are prepared whenever we listen to the Buddha. Now, all this we have to like bear in mind, the literary tradition of the suttas, right? So the Buddha probably will say, well, Poṭṭhapāda, you know, the Buddha arises in the world, and then this is what happens. Having realized by his own direct knowledge this world with its gods, its maras, the bad ones, and its brahmas, the high gods, this generation with its recluses and brahmins, its rulers and people, he makes it known to others. This is to show that the teaching is freely, openly available. Now you may think, oh, okay, you know, we're so used to this saying, but up to this time, up to the Buddha's time, religion was in the hands of the Brahmins, and they were not in the habit of teaching everyone. In fact, they kept religion very private to their family, and the people went to the Brahmins for rituals. So religion was not freely available until the Buddha's time, when there was this social, intellectual ferment. People were very curious. Everybody started asking, intelligent people started asking about what's the meaning of life, what do we do, how do we find peace, and so on. So here the Buddha says, okay, there is this Buddha, he comes into the world, he teaches the Dharma, good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in his end. Now this refers to the three training, okay? Training in moral virtue, training in mental cultivation, and in wisdom, which we'll deal in more detail in a moment. Endowed with meaning and phrasing, right? So the teaching is given beautifully phrased and also with meaning, so that those who hear can understand. And then there is the training, the holy life. He proclaims the holy life that is entirely complete and pure. So you can join and become renunciants. And then in section 7.5, the Buddha talks about the possibility of renouncing. A house lord or house lord's son, hearing the Dharma, gains faith in the Tathagata and reflects the household life is stifling, a dusty path. The life of renunciation is like the open air. It is not easy living in a house to practice the holy life completely in all its purity, like a polished conch shell, right? So someone hears the teaching and he shifts off his hair and beard, puts on saffron robes, and go forth from the household life into homelessness. 7.6. So after some time, he abandons all his wealth and relatives, shaves off his hair and beard, puts on the saffron robes, and go forth from the household life into homelessness. When he has thus gone forth, he leaves restrained by the rules of the monastic code, it's a patimokkha, possessed of proper conduct and resort. Having taken up the rules of training, he trains himself in them, seeing danger in the slightest faults. He comes to be endowed with wholesome bodily and verbal deeds, his livelihood purified, and he is possessed of moral virtue. Now you'll see this section elaborated in a while further down. He guards the sense doors, is possessed of mindfulness and clear comprehension and content. And this is the mental training aspect, also elaborated below, right? So this is a kind of summary. It's very structured, very systematic. The Buddha is introducing the teaching. So now you have section A here, right? A, B, C, okay? So this is a famous section. Remember, this is D9, all right? This moral conduct section is found in all the first 13 suttas of the Digha Nikaya. So these are called stock passages. they show the behavior of the monks, the rules that those monks follow, especially when they're arahats. All right. And I've given the headers here, like Samanera Sikha and so on. They're not originally in the sutta, so this to help people who know the Pali canon well enough to locate all these references, okay, that they are given elsewhere also. So here, this is the first training, the moral training in moral conduct. So it's A, and then B is training in mental cultivation, and C is wisdom. And then the part 1 is the lesser section on moral virtue, and they're called the moralities. Okay, so it is also found in another sutta called the Samanya-Pala Sutta. Notice it's D2, Digha Nikaya Sutta 2. There's a comma here, and then after the comma comes section 43 to 63. Same as here. Here again you see 243. Notice. So here you find this repeat passage. Why this number is here is because you won't find this Pali passage in the Pali Text Society version, the one published in London. They have etc. because they assume that we can look back in the Samanya-Pala Sutta and get this section in volume 1, page 65 to 70. All right. That is a bit for those who are interested in translation. All right. What are the rules that these monks follow when they renounce the world? What rules do they keep? So we wonder, okay, well, when did the rules start, right? So you find the suttas mention these rules, even though there's no Vinaya mentioned. So here you have, I've mentioned this, the training of a novice, rules 1, 2, 3, right? All right, let's look at the first one. Here, Poṭṭhapāda, having abandoned the destruction of life, he abstains from destroying life. He dwells with rod and sword laid down, in other words, with neither fear nor force. Conscientious, that means very careful in respecting life. Merciful, compassionate for the welfare of living beings. This is part of his moral virtue, one of the precepts, right? So in other words, the first precept is about not killing, so we know this quite well, right? Okay, now precept 2, you guessed it, right? Let's see. It is against taking the not given, right? Having abandoned the taking what is not given, he abstains from taking what's not given. He takes only what is given, accepts only what is given, lives not by stealth, but by means of a pure mind. This too is part of his moral virtue. Notice the Buddha keeps repeating this part of his moral virtue, so to remind the audience, remind us, this is an important precept. 3, having abandoned in celibacy, he lives a celibate life. You know, this renunciant, the monk or nun, totally abstains from sex. Living apart, so he's living all by himself, living alone, abstaining from the sexual act, the way of the village. Okay, the villagers, in other words, these are people who have children, family people. This is reflective of the renunciants, of course, because the renunciants have taken up these vows, they want this training, they want to go into meditation, so this is what they must do. It's not that, you know, being layman is bad or anything like that. It's just the training. You must remember that, right? So this rule 1, 2, 3 deals with the body, moral virtue of the body. And then the next section is quite systematic. There are the 4 rules of right speech. You can see 4, 5, 6, 7, right? These are familiar things. Having abandoned false speech, he abstains from false speech. He speaks the truth. The truth is his bond, trustworthy, reliable, no deceiver of the world. Notice these are very important terms to show that the monk is very honest, right? Rule 5, having abandoned divisive speech, he abstains from divisive speech. But what he has heard here, he does not tell there to break those people apart from these people here. And what he has said there, he does not tell here to break these people apart from those people there. Thus reconciling those who have broken apart, or consolidating those who are united. He loves concord, delights in concord, enjoys concord, speaks words conducive to concord, to unity. So the proper training of a monk is to keep people united, keep family united. All right. Having abandoned abusive speech, he abstains from abusive speech. He speaks words that are gentle, pleasant to the ear, loving, touching the heart, urbane, delightful, and pleasing to the people. So he speaks words which are nice to hear, which are proper, and people feel good and happy. And 7, having abandoned idle chatter, which the wanderers have been talking, remember? So here the renunciant renounces idle chatter, abstains of idle chatter. He speaks at the right time, speaks what is true, speaks what is beneficial, speaks what is the teaching, what is the discipline, what is the Dhamma, and what is the Vinaya in this case. He speaks words worth treasuring, spoken in time, well-reasoned, well-defined, in other words, not rambling, connected with the goal. The goal here refers, of course, to attaining the path, to awakening. So this too is part of his moral virtue. So this is the renunciant's right speech. Now, in the next part, we come to something new for many of us. These are the other rules that the monks would keep, basically in terms of right livelihood. So look at number 8. He abstains from damaging seeds and plant life, right? So here's another rule, because seeds and plants are very important as food, especially in India at that time, which is mostly based on agriculture, right? So you find that is precept number 8. Then you have 6 to 10. Again, these are back to the 10 precepts of the novices. He eats only once a day, abstaining from the evening meal and from food at improper times. So here, later I'll tell you what this number means, right? This is section 7.13. So it's called a cross-reference. So here, these renunciants, they usually take 1 meal a day, and they do not take food in the evening for the simple reason they are meditators, so they do not need so much food, and they should not be a burden on those who support them, on the public. Rule 10, he abstains from dancing, singing, music, and from watching shows, right? So again, this is obvious because he has become a renunciant. He's going to meditate and he's not going to indulge in worldly things. 11, he abstains from wearing garlands and from beautifying himself with scents and makeup. Again, it's a reminder, he's a renunciant. He's not a layman anymore, so he's going to dress very simple and focus on meditation and so on. 12, he abstains from high and luxurious beds and seats. He sleeps on the ground, in fact. It's a very simple place to rest because he's going to be a wanderer. And number 13, he abstains from accepting gold and silver, all right? So here you see number 17 is very similar. He abstains from buying and selling. So you know they're connected. It's nothing to do with money. Let's have a quick look at this section before we have a short break. So rule 14, he abstains from accepting uncooked grain, raw meat. All right. Why does he not accept uncooked grain? Because he has to store it, and when you store it, bugs will come, and then these bugs get killed. And so it's not very good for the renunciant. So, and moreover, he has to carry these things around. It will prevent him from wandering around, doing his meditation. And raw meat means you have to cook, and these renunciants don't cook. They live on alms. Now, if you are given men and women, well, women and girls, sorry, it means they are slaves, you know, male and female slaves, right? So then you have to take care of them. I mean, it's rather odd for renunciants to have slaves. And again, they do not receive goat and sheep, but they have to take care of them, right? Fowls and pigs and elephants, cattle, horses and mares, right? These last four animals, they actually are important to the king. So if they're given to the monks, then the monks will sabotaging the king's defense, right? So, but anyway, the monks don't need all this. 15, he abstains from accepting fields and land properties. So this way, technically, a monk doesn't own all these assets. But later on, when the sangha is developed, the sangha will maybe own the land in a manner of speaking, on which the monastery is built. But that's another story. It doesn't belong to any one monk. It belongs to the community. 16, he abstains from running messages. Again, here you find this will be given in detail below, which we'll come to in a while. No? I'm just making a note here. Okay. Then 17, he abstains from buying and selling, already mentioned. He abstains from dealing with false scales, false metals, and false measures. You may wonder why Buddha mentioned all this? Because this is the way the lay people would act. And the monks should have nothing to do with this sort of thing. He abstains from bribery, deception, and fraud. It's obvious, right? So but it has to be stated. And 20, he abstains from wounding, executing, imprisoning, highway robbery, plunder, and violence. In other words, no kung fu, okay? Maybe in China, but not the training of the Indian monks. So this too is part of his moral virtue. So this forms the basic code, all right, the basic rules for the monks. So now we're going to look into, later on after the break, the second part, intermediate section, and then the greater section. Okay, so now we'll take a short break, and we'll come back in a while. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Brother Piya. Yeah, we take the 5 minutes break now.
All right, so now we're going to what's called the intermediate section on moral virtue. Okay, now this second section deals with sort of what a monk should not do in more detail, especially in terms of his livelihood, in terms of his conduct of daily behavior rather. The livelihood section will come in the third part. That is the greater section, huh? the great section on moral virtue. So here is his general conduct. So let's look at one example here. It's quite a long list, which I've done before, so I'm not going to go through everything today. I'll just give you some samples. Look at 7.13. Whereas some recluses and Brahmins living off food given in faith are addicted to damaging seeds and plants such as these. Notice, so here the sutta gives details. Earlier on, the last rule says a monk should not damage seeds and plants, you remember. So here the examples are given, all right? Plants propagated from roots, stems, joints, buddings, and seeds. In fact, you notice there are 5 ways. So here we have a bit of social history of India. They knew, even since the Buddha's time, how to grow plants in 5 ways, from roots, from stems, from joints, from buddings, and of course, from seeds. And monks should be very careful not to damage any of these. So these are also regarded as life, to protect the food of the people. So the rule is repeated. He abstains from damaging seeds and plant life, such as these. All right. And then the next section, remember, on the stored up goods, right? So here the stored up goods are listed out in detail, right? Stored up food, stored up drinks, stored up clothing, stored up vehicles, stored up bedding, stored up sand, stored up meat. So a monk does not store up things, in other words. Okay, so it goes on like that. So this sutta will give all the details. And for example, let's go for one more example, and then we'll move on. Let's look at 7.19. Okay, 7.19 is very familiar. Right, you notice when we started off the sutta, the wanderers were talking all kinds of things, and here it's repeated. Okay, Whereas some recluses and Brahmins living of food given in faith are addicted to low chattas such as these, talking about kings, about robbers, ministers of states, and so on. And these are exactly what the wanderers were talking about. So they probably were kind of looking down the ground when the Buddha mentions this. No? And of course, Poṭṭhapāda is kind of nodding his head, perhaps. So you have this kind, all these rules are listed in detail here. So now let's look at the grade section. The grade section focuses on the monk's right livelihood. And again, of course, give details of examples of what a monk should not do. Take, for example, 7.23. 7.23. Here the Buddha says, whereas some recluses and Brahmins living off food given in faith maintain themselves by wrong livelihood through the low arts, such as forecasting. So here the wrong livelihood is living by predictions, readings, and protections. Notice this format says these recluses and Brahmins, they live on alms given by devotees, but they live by wrong livelihood. For example, reading marks on the limbs, meaning palmistry, soul reading, palm reading, soul reading, reading omens and signs, interpreting celestial events, lightning, falling stars and comets, interpreting dreams. These are by monks, by the way, earning a living doing these things, which is wrong. Reading marks on the body, meaning physiognomy, phrenology. Physiognomy is basically the face, phrenology is the bumps on the head. Reading marks on cloth, not by mice. So they have all these strange beliefs. Rats come along and bite up clothes and then see the kind of holes they make, you can tell fortune. Offering fire oblations, oblation from a ladle. All these are done by Brahmins, by the way, making offerings. No? And notice other kinds of offerings. Offering oblations using oral spells, some kind of chant. Offering blood sacrifices. Making predictions based on fingertips, calculation, and so on. So there's all fortune-telling things. There's a whole list of them, which a monk should not do, right? So it's quite clear, right, that the life of a monk is meant to renounce all these things and focus on mental training, all right? Let me just read the last part, and then we go on to the let me see. Okay, the grade section, right? So let's look at the grade section now, further down. 7.23. Oh, we have just finished 7.23, right? Grade section, which I've read to you. So you have an idea how in this whole grade section, the Mahasila, they all deal with the wrong livelihood, which a monk should avoid, right? And like I said, let's look at the last one, 7.29, before we move on, 7.29. Okay, there you are. Whereas some recluses and Brahmins living off food given in faith maintain themselves by wrong livelihood through the low arts, such as in this case, ritual protection and healing, promising gifts to deities in return for favors, and then fulfilling such gifts. So this all worshipping deities, demonology, teaching house protection spells, inducing virility and impotence. So this is like charm making, consecrating sites for construction. This is a bit like, Germancy, giving ceremonial mouthwashes and ceremonial bathing. Right? This is very common with the Thais today. Offering sacrificial fires. The Japanese like to do this. Preparing emetics, purgatives, expectorants, diuretics, headache cures. So this way that the monks act as doctors. This again controversial. It seems that a monk who knows healing can help other monks who are sick, but he is not allowed to do this for lay people, especially as a way of life, as a livelihood. Right? So he's not supposed to prepare ear oil, ear drops. or for treatment through the nose, collyrium, or collyrium is a kind of a coloring for the eyebrow. Actually, you can also translate as eye wash and counter medicines, in order to counter other medicines. Of course, with all this mentioned, we know that all these things exist during the Buddha's time. Curing cataracts, so this is amazing. So the impression we get here is they know about cataracts even in those days. Practicing surgery, practicing as a children's doctor, administering medicines and treatments to cure the after effects. Right? So there you are. A monk should not be doing this. Of course, on the positive side, we are given a hint that all these are known in the Buddha's time by the doctors of those days. Right? But the monk has renounced the world and he's meant to do just that. And what is it? He practiced the precepts for the sake of mental training, which is part B, the next section. Okay, let's go to the next section. You can see part B, mental development. So here, how does this renunciant, this monk, prepare for mental training? So here, remember, the Buddha is telling this wanderer Poṭṭhapāda how Buddhist training takes place. So now section 9, and how Poṭṭhapāda does a monk guard the sense doors. So this is the start of learning meditation. You have to learn to guard the 5 physical senses. 9.2. Here Poṭṭhapāda, on seeing a form with the eye, he does not grasp at any sign or detail by which, if he were to dwell without restraint over the faculty of the eye, bad, unwholesome qualities such as covetousness and displeasure might assail him. All right. So there are altogether 5, I think, how many, 6 sections here, right? So the Buddha is telling Poṭṭhapāda how to practice sense restraint. When a monk sees something, he does not get caught with the first sign of it or the details of it. He just let it pass. Unless it's nature, right? Something beautiful, a flower, he sees it and then notices its impermanence. Otherwise, like people and things, the monk sees, he will just let the first detail arise and pass away. This sign and detail are very important psychologically. Let's say when you go shopping, the first thing that will catch your eye is a sign. For example, a color on the shelf. And you say, oh, what's that? You say, oh, it looks like a very nice chocolate or some product. And then you examine the detail. So in the case of the monk, he would let go of both of this. Right? Same thing with sound. 9.3, he hears a sound. The moment the sound comes, he doesn't follow it and then hear the details, what it's all about. It just basically lets go of the sound. Same thing with the smell. Just let the smell come and let the smell go. Let's not, get caught up with it. And same thing with taste. And this is not easy for most of us, lay people. But for a monk, he just eats and then chews it so that it's properly digested and then swallows it. So it eats to live in this case. So this is the training in guarding the sense doors. Now the most tricky, of course, is 9.7 on cognizing a mind object. Right? With a mind, he does not grasp at any sign or detail by which, if he were to dwell without restraint over the faculty of the mind, bad, unwholesome qualities such as covetousness and displeasure might assail him. So the moment a thought comes, he lets it go. So that covetousness, meaning here desire, he thinks it's this nice, he wants to go on thinking about it, or he doesn't like it and he gets upset. That's the opposite. This covetousness and displeasure, this dvandva means a twin compound, refers to the five what they call hindrances actually, that prevents the meditator from getting focused. So this is the two things he must guard against, not to be drawn into something he likes or repelled by something he doesn't like. So he sees things, he senses things, he lets them arise and lets them pass away, just like that. And when he's able to do that, then he's mindful. So that's the next section, mindfulness and clear comprehension. So here, how does he practice it? How is a monk possessed of mindfulness and clear comprehension? Here, Poṭṭhapāda, in going forward or back, he clearly comprehends what he's doing. So he notices what's going on and he knows just what to do. That's the idea here. Clearly comprehends, he knows what's going on, he knows what to do. In looking forward, looking back, he knows what he's doing. In bending and stretching, he knows what he's doing. Right? When I'm doing my senior yoga, I have to practice this. And it's not that easy because sometimes I do forget. Did I do 3 stages? So what I normally do is I can't remember. I just add one more stage. It could be the 4th stage. So when bending, stretching, you're mindful. So all these kind of, for lay people, these exercises are also helpful in keeping our mindfulness. In carrying his upper robe, outer robe, and bow, he clearly comprehends what he's doing. For lay people like us, when we are wearing our clothes, so mindful that we properly have donned our clothing. In eating, drinking, chewing, tasting, he clearly comprehends what he's doing. So it's basically eating mindfully. In voiding and peeing, he clearly comprehends what he's doing. Right? So even in the toilet, you should do it mindfully, and this is for your health. In other words, 7, in walking, in standing, in sitting, in being asleep, in being awake, in talking, in remaining silent, he clearly comprehends what he's doing. This last part is a bit tricky. How do you do this when you are asleep, right? Here, and it's not easy for an ordinary person. Basically, for ordinary people, is to lie down mindfully. So in other words, don't think about this and that. So just lie down and then you fall asleep. Apparently, those who are developed in meditation and so on, there is this mind that like keeps them in a certain posture and they sleep mindfully in that sense. You can't be awake when you're asleep. So here the idea is that there is that kind of part of the mind, if you like, or part of the brain, the scientists would say, that keeps that body in the proper posture. That's one way of putting it. Yeah? All right, so all this attitude will make the monk content. 9.11, the monk becomes happy with what he has and what he is. This is a beautiful part, the short passage. Here, Poṭṭhapāda, he is content with robes to protect his body and with alms food to maintain his belly. And wherever he goes, he sets out only with these with him. Then you have this beautiful metaphor. Here, just as a bird, wherever it goes, it flies with its wings as its only burden. So too is he content with robes to protect his body and with alms food to maintain his belly. Wherever he goes, it takes only these with him. So the monk is like a free bird, in other words, in this sense. Okay, it's beautiful to live like that, isn't it? So we can reflect on this. When you reflect on this, you feel happy, and that helps too, even though we are not renunciants. Now the training goes deeper, preparing to go into meditation, overcoming the mental hindrances, possessing this aggregate of noble moral virtue, this aggregate of noble sense restraint, and this noble aggregate of mindfulness and clear comprehension, and this noble aggregate of noble contentment. So he has prepared himself with moral virtue, training in moral virtue. He seeks out a secluded dwelling, right? So here, in other words, a proper place for meditation. And this may be a forest, the foot of a tree, a mountain, a glen, a hillside cave rather, a charnel ground, a jungle grove, the open air, a heap of straw, right? And as you know, Rana and I will often go to the Jurong Lake Park, and we do occasionally find people sitting there meditating. So it's a beautiful place. And now I often do my senior yoga on this, what's called a floating wetlands. There are this bit of space there which actually floats in the water. And it's a very nice place with nature around you to do meditation as well as yoga. All right, so here the monk prepares himself for letting go, number one, of covetousness. Notice, no? The abandoning covetousness with regard to the world. He dwells with a mind devoid of covetousness. He cleanses his mind of covetousness. All desire is let go of. So this all that has been done through moral virtue and so on in preparation for meditation will clear the mind of wanting this, wanting that. Now, once you have cleared one, two happens almost naturally, right? So he abandons ill will and anger. He dwells with a mind devoid of ill will, sympathetic with the welfare of all living beings. And he cleanses his mind of ill will and anger, right? So you have metta, in other words. Yeah, I remember when I was doing my yoga that this otter came from under the water and came up and started chirping at me, and then for a while they went away. So it's really nice to have animals even there, knowing that you're present. Because the animals can sense your loving kindness, your metta. Now the third, what you call hindrance to meditation, but to overcome is sloth and torpor. This happens when you try too hard and you're doing the meditation wrongly, you feel tired and sleepy. So you let go of this so your mind becomes alert. Now there's something interesting here, is perceiving light. So in other words, it helps for some people to sit in a bright place that will keep you fresh. And then when you are full of tiredness, then you become restless and full of worries. Restlessness is when you wonder when will the meditation end and you want to start doing things. Worry here refers to things from the past which comes back to us. And so we let go of both of this and just keep the mind in the present. And number 5 is we overcome spiritual doubt by studying sutras, by knowing some Dhamma, so we don't start, while we're meditating, the doubts don't come and trouble us, basically. So these are the 5 hindrances which need to be overcome. Covetousness, ill will and anger, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, spiritual doubt. Now the sutta uses a metaphor, 5 metaphors, right? So overcoming desire is like someone who has paid back all his loans. So here is the parable of the loan, if you like. You know, someone owes money and he's able to pay back everything, and his business can, you know, succeed, and he has surplus to support a family and wife. So this parable is really beautiful. The overcoming desire is like you are free from debt, right? So now a business will succeed. Then number 2, overcoming ill will and anger is like someone who was sick, and now he overcomes the sickness. He recovers from sickness. All right. And then the third hindrance is someone who feels sleepy and tired, sloth and torpor. It's like a prisoner who is now free he's released from bondage, like a slave released from bondage, and he's happy and he's free now, right? So this is the third. No, let me correct that. The third one is the prisoner who is free from prison. That is the slow tapa. And then restlessness and worry is like number 4, the slave is free from bondage. And then number 5, the person who's free from doubt. He's like a merchant who has traveled through the desert, very dangerous journey through wilderness, carrying his goods and money. And now he's reached the city safely. He can go on with his business. He has not lost anything during the journey. So he has reached the destination safely through the wilderness. So this is like the person who has overcome all doubts. So there you are. These are the parables of the hindrances. So now this person who has overcome all these 5 hindrances is able to attain jhana. All right, so now let's look at the jhana. Okay, this one is for many of you quite familiar. Now look at 10.2 first of all. 10.2 is introduction. So seeing that all these hindrances have been abandoned within him, he becomes glad, he's happy. For one who is glad, zest arises. From one whose mind is zestful, the body is tranquil. One tranquil in body feels happy. For one who is happy, the mind concentrates. Now this is why in our meditation, you are told to smile, right? The smile helps you to be happy, and that helps you to concentrate, to focus. And when you are fully focused, you're free from desire and hate, you attain the first jhana, right? So the first jhana, the mind is free from the encumbrances of the body. In other words, the 5 senses don't trouble you anymore. But there's still a bit of thought lingering, right? So this is the first jhana. Vitaka, vichara, there's a bit of thinking, a bit of directing the mind still happens, right? So that's first jhana. Then when you let go of this thinking, all this thinking is gone, then you go on to the second jhana. All right. Now I'm not going to details here because you already have done this many times before, so I'm just summarizing. And then in the third jhana, the zest, that is that bubbly joy, settles down, become very peaceful. So that's the third jhana, that you have this very peaceful, calm joy. And in the fourth jhana, the idea of joy is totally gone. There is just this peace. Now, this is something difficult to understand unless you're a meditator, right? It's just like, when you're eating something, wow, you really like, now durian is cheap in Singapore, so we eat lots of durian and feel, wow, this is really good. And then after a while, you finish eating it, you feel happy, you feel good. So it's not a matter of nice or not nice, you're happy, you're satisfied. So, right, so this is the example of the fourth jhana, where you feel very contented and happy. All right. Now, the fourth jhana is the key here. This mind becomes very stable and very calm. As the concentration becomes more and more refined, then you get the other 4 formless attainments. And this is what I will explain with a little detail, because I don't think I've done this before with you. So look at section 14. How do we get the first formless jhana? Furthermore, Poṭṭhapāda among by completely transcending the perceptions of form. Here, in other words, all ideas of rupa, of matter, anything to do with the senses, the bodies, is gone with the disappearance of the perception of sense reaction. No more sensing, in other words. The 5 senses are all settled down. And non-attention to the perception of diversity. We do not see this and that, so many things. And the mind is aware. Space is infinite. This mental idea of space. Space is boundless. And this is where the meditator goes into the base of infinite space. So this is the first formless base. First formless jhana, infinite space. All right. Okay, so now we look at the next formless jhana. That is number 6. Number 6, of course, is number 2 of the formless jhana. So here, what happens is this meditator, he has been, the object of his meditation is infinite space, right? Sorry, infinite consciousness. So he sees this, because he sees infinite space, his mind becomes infinite, okay? So it becomes infinite consciousness. So that is his object. There is this infinite consciousness as the object. Now, because he's able to master, you have to be able to master this stage first. It's easier talking about it than doing it, actually. But here, the meditator lets go of the object that is called the base of infinite consciousness. Infinite consciousness is the object. And when he lets go of that, there is nothing left, right? So that's called the base of nothingness. This is the second formless base. That is jhana number 7, all right? Nothingness. So the object is nothingness. Now we can only talk about this because this is really very profound, right? Imagine the object is nothingness. No? So now once you reach this, you have this, just now we have infinite space and infinite consciousness, and then there is nothingness. That is number 7 already, nothingness. Now, there's something missing here. The Buddha didn't mention the 4th formless base, that is the neither perception nor non-perception. Apparently, this is almost like a useless kind of formless base, because it's pleasant and you can remain there and nothing happens, you feel joyful, yeah. So the Buddha often doesn't mention it when it comes to actual practice. So here the Buddha leaves that stage 8 out. He goes straight into cessation, the ending of consciousness as we know it, if you like. So this is where the Buddha is going to answer the question that Poṭṭhapāda asked, all right? So let's look at 17. So Poṭṭhapāda, from the time that the monk is one who masters his own consciousness, here, that is in the first jhana, he goes on from one state to another in stages, step by step, until he reaches the peak of consciousness. So here the Buddha uses the term the peak of consciousness, but he has not explained this yet, and he's going to do it. And when he's established in the peak of consciousness, it occurs to him, mental activity is bad for me. It would be better for me not to be thinking. Were I to go on thinking and planning, these states of consciousness I have reached would pass away, and other causal consciousness might arise. So here, the Buddha is explaining why the meditator wants to even rise above his present state, to let go of that last bit of consciousness. And this is not easy. In fact, what the Buddha doesn't say here is that although someone may reach the peak of consciousness, that is the highest any person in this world can reach. In a sense, the Buddha is hinting at the 4th formless realm here, although it's not mentioned. That's called the peak of consciousness. But here, because the Buddha is saying that you can also let go of that, he's going into another territory here, which only Buddhas and Arahats and some non-returners may be able to do. That is to get out of consciousness itself. Because remember, the question that Poṭṭhapāda is asking is, how does consciousness end? When does it stop? So this is what the Buddha is saying. So the Buddha is saying that this is the time when it can end. Step by step, you let go of it. Okay, but that's all the Buddha can say. I mean, he can't show it, because this Poṭṭhapāda hasn't attained any levels yet. So let's look at 19. So here is where Poṭṭhapāda asks, and Bhante, does the Venerable Blessed One teach that there is one peak of consciousness or there are many, right? So he's wondering, he's not sure. Since the Buddha says, of course, there are many. It depends on the meditator. There are many. Depends on how the meditator experiences it. Okay? So this is just a manner of talking. It doesn't mean anything to us because we have not experienced these things. But basically, the meditator can attain it in different ways, depending on his skill. And then 20, Poṭṭhapāda asks, Bhante, does consciousness arise first and then knowledge? Or does knowledge arise first and then consciousness? Or do both knowledge and consciousness arise simultaneously, arise together, right? So here he is quite curious. And the Buddha replies, it is consciousness, Poṭṭhapāda, that arises first and then knowledge. And the arising of knowledge is dependent on the arising of consciousness, right? So you got to be conscious of something and then you know it. To know something is to sense it, in other words. And then you form ideas about it. So that's the meaning of knowing. And now we come to the last part for today, right? So section 20.3. And this Poṭṭhapāda may be understood in whatever way he attains cessation, in that way he reaches the peak of consciousness. And the arising of knowledge is dependent on the arising of consciousness. So here the Buddha's answered the question for Poṭṭhapāda. Of course, the discourse doesn't end here because Poṭṭhapāda has a number more questions. He asks about the self and so on. So very interesting question, which we'll need another lesson to finish. So we will stop here for today at this point with the Buddha's answer to Poṭṭhapāda. And then in the next lesson, we go into questions about consciousness and the self, which the Buddha will answer.
Thank you, Piya, for the teaching. Now we have our Q&A session. Anybody has any question, you can ask now or type in the chat box. You can put up your hand to ask question.
Yes, you can ask now.
Okay, Maya. Yes, please unmute yourself.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah,
yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So I was asking that. Okay, so like the enlightenment, Buddha's enlightenment is sometimes described as direct knowledge of the world with its devas, maras, and the sentence.
Yes.
So I wonder sometimes that is the is the enlightenment experience stream winning onwards, is it something like that the knowledge is like you basically experience everything that can be there in the universe, kind of a thing?
It has been described that way by some people in books, yeah. But the way the Buddha described it is more like you see all these things as being impermanent. And then there is no essence behind it. There's no self behind it. What you mentioned probably will happen after that. Because when you look into reality, there is this emptiness there. And your mind is very clear and spacious. boundless. But then when you look back into the world, that's when you begin to see everything. Because you begin to see this, what is a thing? Is whatever is passing by very fast as you watch. A thing is a sight you see with the eye. A thing is a sound you hear with the ear. A smell you smell, taste, touch, and a thought. So those are things. So yes, everything passes quickly by because they're all impermanent. So you can put it that way. You begin to see all those things as if they all never really happened. That's one way of putting it, but they're all impermanent. The moment you notice them, they are gone, you see. In order for you to understand me, the words that you hear, they must move on, one by one, very fast, little dots of information, and then this understanding comes to you. So this consciousness arises in you, then knowledge comes.
So when we say that we see everything, so that does mean that like you're sitting here, like somebody, let's say he gets the first path, stream winner and onwards. So he's sitting at a place, and then once he's back from that experience, he can actually experience everything or different things, like having direct experience of various phenomena or experiences, you might say, just sitting at one place.
Yeah, when we talk about it, it sounds really baffling. The term everything has been used, sabba or sarva in Sanskrit. The Buddha is one who knows all, but it has been mistranslated as omniscience. That has another different meaning already. Here, to know the all, then there is a sutta called the Sabba Sutta. What is the all? The all are our eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And then the sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thoughts. That's the all. That's all you can experience, right? The Buddha says, if you try to think of anything beyond that, you're going to put yourself into a lot of trouble, and because there's nothing beyond that. That is the all, is it? Right? The six senses and the six sense objects. And that's an amazing statement. It's a short sutta, it's so profound. Okay? All right, good.
Okay, thank you.
Charles asked a question just now.
Charles, is it? Okay, please unmute yourself.
Thank you. This may kind of follow up on the previous question, but I'm wondering if in this last part that you talked about, if it says that consciousness leads to knowledge.
Yeah.
The knowledge he's talking about, is that mundane knowledge, or is that like the insight into, the
yeah, good question.
Seeing clearly that there's no self, that life is suffering and impermanent.
The first answer is that it deals with mundane knowledge. How, like right now, when you are listening to me, you're conscious of my voice, and then your mind, English, so your mind will process English, and then you understand a bit of Buddhism. Say, oh, okay, this is what it's talking about, and you put things together, and you ask me this question. All right, all this is a process of knowing in a mundane way. Then later on, you meditate, and then you become very peaceful and calm. You're conscious, and then you look around you, and then you see these insects flying around, and then zap, they're gone. And you see this sunlight slowly setting on the horizon. They say, oh, look, this is all impermanent. So your consciousness notices the little things, and that becomes a bit more, I wouldn't say supra-mundane yet, but it is more spiritual, so to speak, to use a kind of general term. The supra-mundane is where you actually attain the state of stream winning onwards. That's when you will not fall back in the ways of the world. All right, you can refer to that also. Yeah, so it's a general term in this case.
Thank
you.
So
that helps. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you for your question. Any more questions, please? Okay, Patricia, please.
Okay. I have a question about the metaphors of the 5 hindrances.
Yes.
I found them very interesting because, for example, restlessness is compared to being a slave. So I can imagine that when you want to meditate and you feel like you have to do something, it is like being a slave.
Yeah.
Or if the first one, I don't know the word you use, I think about craving, it is compared with debt. Like you feel that you need to have to solve something, you need to go after something.
Yeah.
So, but I was thinking about the metaphor of sickness for feeling of ill will. And I cannot
Okay.
see how this is related.
Right. Okay. Ill will, anger is compared to sickness. What happens when we feel hateful, angry? We feel that we're not normal. I mean, we don't enjoy things very much. And because we don't enjoy the things we usually would enjoy, that puts us in the category of not really that well. Because if you're really well, you'll be happy, enjoying things. But when you're angry and you're full of hate, you are not likely to enjoy those things. So that makes you sick in that sense. That makes you not enjoy the usual things that you would enjoy. In that sense, you don't feel well. You will not feel well. You will not feel good in the sense of happy. That's one way. I don't know whether that helps. A simple way of putting it. And you find people who are really full of anger and hate, they get into this really very dark situation, and they actually get sick because of their hate. It does affect them very negatively, right? And you notice the doctors will tell you, if you feel happy when you're sick, it helps you to recover. That's the opposite side of it. So it is in that connection, I think, why the metaphor of falling sick is used to illustrate hatred and ill will. And this person recovers from sickness, is free from hate, he feels happy, he realizes there's nothing to hate here. So I don't know whether you can see that. If you try a bit of reflecting on it a bit more, it might help. Okay.
One nice thing about it also is the English word ill will is also has the word ill in it.
Yes.
Like
Yeah, that's right. So you begin to see all this connection. Yeah. So really nice to see all this. These are very famous metaphors, these 5. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, any more
We got
questions?
a couple of minutes
2
more.
more minutes. Yes. Mayang, please.
Yes, Ralph, I wanted to ask, this sutta also gives a little background of the Indian society, and it means different things. Like, so I wanted to ask, like, is there a reading perhaps or a book that you might recommend that actually shows in an unbiased way, like how was the Indian society and culture when Buddha was there, and then how the existing religion and culture again interacted with Buddhism, and even in fact a little bit before and after Buddha, like what happened and how all the interaction took place.
But there is a scholar called Uma Chakravarti. I think she writes about all this social aspect of Indian society. Uma Chakravarti, yeah. And if you want the details of her works, just message me on Telegram. I can try to look up some of the titles. Yeah.
Great,
yeah, I mean, this is getting back to your culture. It's quite amazing to know all these things. That's one thing the suttas also give us, the social aspect of Indian society. Yeah.
Right. And to get some clarity, like, what happened in the background and how the history actually.
Yeah, very interesting to know. Okay. Any other questions? Last one, perhaps.
And can I ask one more?
Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah. Okay. This is actually related to the first precept against killing. Does Buddha have a view on, say, like the defense forces and I mean the defense of the countries? Like, I mean, can people who are in the forces also be following Buddhism and be good Buddhists? And I mean, and there will be a challenge, of course, because they are trained in combat to kill and
Yes.
they're trained like that. And there might be situations in like wars where they actually have to do that. So, like, is there something he does say about it?
Oh yes, he was clearly a pacifist. I mean, he is quite against war. Of course, he's very careful not to antagonize the kings. The kings of those days were very fierce and powerful. So he does give all these teachings, and there are stories about how he prevented wars. He prevented his relative, the Sakyas and the Kolyas, from fighting over the water of the Rohini River, if you remember. So he does intervene when he can. He is for peace. And I think this is when society really progresses and there is peace, then they can really appreciate the Buddha's teaching. Right now in Ukraine, all that's going to be quite difficult because that's just the opposite of what the Buddha is teaching. And we don't like that. I mean, people are just, losing their lives and property because of politics, So that is why you have to build up from the ground up by deciding what are of great value to us. And as you know, based on the 5 precepts, the very first thing that is of the greatest value to us is life itself. That is why the first precept is against killing. And then from there, you work out the other values in our life. So that is why Buddhism is important to build up this idea of peace. In fact, if you notice from, say, the last 1,000 years, you find when religion was very powerful in Europe, you find there's a lot of war. It was 30 years war, 100 years war, and then millions died. And people within the same religion, and it was terrible, And one of my friends, proofreaders, told me, even Europeans feel the effect today, especially those come from the poorer classes, when they want to track the details of their relatives, their ancestors, there's no way that they can find the records anymore because all those churches have been burned down during the wars and the family records are all gone. So it's like you lose your roots, for that space in the history. So you can imagine how bad it was, the role that religion played. So at least to a certain extent, I'm not saying 100%, but there is a great extent where Buddhism, the way the Buddha taught it, is about peace. And that is why Buddhism is catching on today, because there is growing peace. And so it is easier to study Buddhism now and bring quality into our lives. All right, so on that note, I think we can end tonight unless there is a really
May I ask a question?
Okay, sure.
Piya and Ratna.
Yeah,
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
Thank you for giving me this chance.
All right.
It's on this topic of killing.
Yeah.
When we talk about killing, are we talking about killing of human beings? What about the killing of human beings? What about the killing of the low animals, your chicken, your cow,
Yeah,
your
includes
beef,
everything, killing all
what
life.
about
Yeah.
insects, including viruses,
Okay.
bacteria, germs?
All right, let me just give a quick answer there. Life is defined as breath. They have this breathing process, and we might include the thinking process, right? So bacteria is not in because it's more like a chemical process. It doesn't have a mind. So boiling water is okay, But even then, monks are very careful in not starting fire in nature, things like that, because they might kill little bugs, insects, and those have life. Those are regarded as living beings. The most important life, of course, are the human life and the bigger animals and so on. And we are also taught to respect life in general, so that nature will, somehow things will grow naturally. The important thing is life is precious, and nature has a way of somehow balancing itself. We don't have to, get involved in doing that. The basic rule is life is precious. Even animals, when they sense you're going to harm them, they won't come near you, they'll run away. So you can sense that. So it's not an easy thing to compromise. So the Buddha takes a clear stance that but life is precious. So it's not an easy stand to take, but that's the first precept. That's why it's a first precept, because it's the hardest to keep, and we have to really work hard to keep it, because our habit is that we do destroy life somehow, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly. But bacteria or these bugs, bacteria, these viruses, they're not regarded as living beings. They're chemical processes in that sense. Okay, so let me end there. Huh?
Yeah, we'll take a photo.
Okay, yes,
Turn
okay.
on your video, please.
Yeah. Okay, photo time. Okay, yes, everyone, come on. Let's get ready. Yeah, good to see you all. Sumita, no camera, is it? Okay. Phyllis, good, you're back.
Vicky,
Yes, Vicky.
Sumita,
Vicky, are you there? Yes, sometimes they have no camera, I think. It's okay now, I think.
wait for Vicky. Vicky, you're black. Cannot see you.
In the dark. It's okay. Yes, sometimes the camera can be a
Okay,
problem.
Sumita, I see her.
Okay, yes. It's all right. Yes.
Okay, no, she is here already.
All right, okay, big smile. Yeah, very good.
Okay, that's good.
Okay.
Okay, smile. 1, 2, 3. Oh, Melinda just disappeared. Okay, thank you very much. So we'll close with the closing salutation.
Okay. All right, let's go on to the closing salutation. All right. Okay, right. Once again, I'm happy that you all stay right to the end of this quite difficult sutta. It's very long sutta, Poṭṭhapāda Sutta Part 1. You can see it's a very profound teaching. We have gathered here today from different parts of the world. We have recited the 3 refuges and 5 precepts, and we have done some meditation and listened to the Dhamma, and these are all very good karma. By this good we have done, may we be at peace with ourselves, be in good health, so that we are able to study the suttas and gain wisdom in this life itself. It is also the time for us to send our loving kindness to our loved ones, wherever they may be. Send your thoughts to people who are important to you. Wish them well and happy. And above all, let us show our gratitude to the 3 jewels who have given us this great happiness and wisdom here and now, to this day. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami. Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.